everybody, this is Caitlin here, and today we have a new Force of Will deck profile for you today. I was kind of trying to think of like different ideas and such for deck profiles because I was like looking at all the cards I have, and ideally I don't like have all the specific cards that would ideally go in like a dream meta deck or something like that. I am still missing quite a couple of things, despite how many booster boxes I've actually bought. But I am missing like a couple of like key things like in my collection and stuff. So you'll see that a couple of things in like these more recent deck profiles, there's going to be substitutions of like say magic stones or other cards, mainly just because I don't own like the like card I would prefer to have in the deck, but I'm just making do with what I have, which it's going to be probably a point I'm going to bring up in this video today for this deck profile. But the idea behind this one is that it's going to be mainly a fairy deck, but we're using Arla instead of any of the other rulers that you would normally see for fairies. And I have a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that I really don't like Fairy Alice. I feel like she doesn't support the fairies as much as I would like. I feel like her judgment, of course, reduces, like, it starts off as 8 and reduces depending on how many fairies you own. I really don't like that, like, because it feels like, you know, I have to keep things alive. Like, ideally, I would like to keep as many fairies alive as I could, because obviously they're small things, but they can, you know, buff themselves up and stuff. But I didn't like that she cost so much. Also, I really didn't like her God's Art either. So I wasn't really keen on using her for the ruler. I know that a lot of people say that for fairies, you know, the best ruler is Reflect Refrain, but then everybody says that Reflect Refrain is the best for any kind of deck, or really, like, you just want to, like, get more, kind of, like, shuffling for whatever, but I decided I didn't want to do Reflect Refrain, so I figured, since all the fairies, well, most of them anyway, have flying, I figured that would do an Arla deck where we would have him as our main ruler or whatever, because he's good for people who fly. And it would mainly be fairies. We have like only 2 angels really. We don't have, say, a lot of spells and stuff. Mainly it's just going to be like swarming fairies into the field. But as you recall, I previously did like a deck profile for Arla where it was just like angels built around all the angels and stuff that came out in the Seven Kings booster box. I kind of deconstructed that deck now because it's, you know, it's terribly out of date or whatever, and, you know, it just doesn't hold up as well now. But I still quite like Arla as a ruler, mainly because like he's only 2 light to J-activate, plus he's still got that ability where you can pay 2 light and you can give something with flying 200 to the end of the turn. He is like one of my favourite rulers. He just feels a lot more consistent, and obviously he has one of like the better regalias in the game. And obviously when you flip him over, he becomes Arla, the Hegemon of the sky. I'm never quite sure how you're meant to pronounce that. But you know, his awesome effect is that when he enters, you can search your deck for an angel and put it into your hand, and you shuffle your deck. And his God's Art, which is 2 light and then 2 void, is whenever a J/Resonator you control attacks this turn, the ruler here deals 400 damage to a target Resonator your opponent controls each time. And for each of your resonators that you control that attack this turn. So it is a pretty awesome God's Art Rain of Arrows. I quite like it. It's like it's really good. It kind of like loves up to the theme of like Arla coming down from the sky to wreak judgment on like the land and such. He is like, I think he's meant to be more like a benevolent ruler, like as opposed to like say Valentina and such, but he is one of my favourite rulers, and I know it might not be like the best kind of deck idea like to give him fairies or whatever, but I thought, you know, it'd be something a little bit more quirky, something different to do with fairies. So, and you know, I was excited at first for fairies when they first came out, but then when I saw Fairy Alice and I just wasn't excited to play her, I was just like, really, is this what they're going to give fairies or whatever? But I want to try this out. I think it's just like something a little bit different, and as you can see, I've not got like all the ideal cards for this deck, but I've kind of tried to substitute what I can when I can. So the first we have for most of these Resonators are actually 1-drops, as you'll find, because most of the fairies are very cheap. They're not like big buffy things or anything like that. So the first one we have is the Wind Sprite. Sadly, Wind Sprite doesn't have any flying, so they're not going to get a buff from any of our flying stuff. But that's okay. Mainly it's here just to give us another area to get light well. So we can tap it and produce light, which is really nice, running 4 of those. Next fairy that we have is the Water Sprite, running 4 of those as well. Mainly we're running these at playsets of 4 for the cheaper ones, and maybe not as much for the slightly more expensive ones. Water Sprite, it has flying, obviously, 200, 300, and when it enters the field, we can reveal the top card of our main deck, and if it's a fairy, we can put it into our hand, which is nice. The majority of this deck is fairy. I think there's only 2 different angels, to meet for Arla's requirement or whatever, or like to at least get his effect off. But other than that, it's mostly fairies with the occasional regalia and spell. And our next resonator that we have the Light Sprite. I kind of favour this one over the other Light Sprite that came out in Twilight Wanderer, mainly because when we tap it, we can gain 100 life for each fairy we control. So probably we're not going to even use this for attacking. We're going to mainly use it for its tap ability, so that we can, get that life back, considering that we're probably going to take a couple of hits. Considering that not a lot of these at first are going to be like big blockers or anything like that. The next one that we have 4 of the Black Moon Fairy, which came out in Moonlit Savior. And, I'm kind of happy that we have a Dark Fairy now, because it just kind of like completes the set of all the fairies. So this is also flying, and when this one enters the graveyard from your field, we can put a non-darkness fairy from our graveyard into our hand. I also quite like her because she's got like butterfly wings. I like how all the different fairies have like really unique designs. Like they all look pretty different. You probably wouldn't mix them up for each other because they just all look so different. And I think the last one that we have that's a 1-drop fairy is actually the Flame Sprite, which we're running at 4. Again, I think this is one of the best like 1-drop fires now in the game, because it has flying, it has swiftness. We can tap and deal 100 damage to a target resonator for each fairy we control. But mainly we're going to hopefully like draw this first, and hopefully hit a stone that will let us produce fire, so we can just drop it and be like, yeah, here's 200 damage on the first turn, which is really nice. Going into slightly bigger fairies, we have our 2-drops, which we have 3 of Nimue the fairy. This one kind of works in conjunction with Elaine the fairy, as I'll show you in a wee second. It has flying, of course, and its awakening only costs 1 light. And when it enters the field and we awaken it, we can put a target card named Protection of the Fairies from our graveyard into our hand. And all our other fairies we control, gain 200 defense. And similar in that case is Elaine the fairy, which we're also running at 3, just so they kind of complement each other. It's also a 2 cost. Its awakening costs 1 light as well. And when this card enters the field, we can search our deck for Protection of the Fairies and put it into our hand. And all our other fairies gain plus 200 attack. So they kind of work in conjunction with each other, which is really nice. It's like a really cute partnership or whatever. And next, we have the only 3-drop that we have, which is 2 of Viviane, the Lady of the Lake. I thought I had more copies of this card, but it turns out I only have 2. So that's mainly the reason why I'm only running it at 2, is because I only own 2, which is kind of sad. I would proxy it normally, but I feel like, you know what, if it's just fairies, I don't really mind only having 2 of it, because, it's 500, 700, which is probably one of the better, like, fairies that we have. We can tap it and put a fairy resonator with total cost of 1 or less from our hand into the field. And whenever a fairy resonator enters our field, all our fairy resonators gain plus 200 to the end of the turn. So that's kind of nice, where like we can, like, since the fairies are so cheap, we can just drop a load of them and then like get a lot of buffs for the rest of our fairies for that turn, which is really nice. Moving on to the 2 angels I was discussing, and it's obviously going to be the dream pair that is Celestial Wing Seraph and Fallen Angelic Destroyer Lucifer. I totally love these 2 in conjunction with each other now. I kind of almost like ship them a wee bit. It's just like I totally love these 2 together. They're just like the best angel combo, I feel like. Even more than, say, I think, is it the Dignified Angel or something like that? Where it's like, if we don't draw into this, we'll probably search it out if we flip Arla, and then we can drop this for 5, and then, obviously get that search on for Lucifer, and then drop in Lucifer. The only kind of downside is that with this deck, I'm not running anything that will produce Moonwell, so we're probably not going to be getting any effect from Lucifer's other ability, where we can gain life, depending on if we, pay the 1 dark and 1 moon and attack directly. But we've still got the Seraph for that, which, we'll still get a little bit of health back from just even having Seraph, and maybe 1 other Lucifer back, which is pretty nice. So these are kind of like the heavy hitters for our deck. They both have flying, of course, so they're going to get buffs from our flying effects. And that's it in terms of resonators. I'm not running too many spells in this deck, because obviously you can see it's mainly about swarming the field with fairies and like building up that massive army. So in terms of like support for the fairies and for our angels, of course, we have 4 of the Heavenly Garden of Armalla, which gives all our flying resonators plus 200. And then if we say pay 2 light and tap, we can rest a target resonator without flying, which, I hardly ever use that effect. It's mainly just there for the buff for the fairies and for the angels, of course. So it's kind of nice because if you can get this one out, you can at least like assure that your fairies aren't going to be too vulnerable because you've got that 200 buff. In terms of spells, as we said, Protection of the Fairies is also a very important card, so we're running 4 of it. It is a addition, actually. It's not a spell, as I incorrectly stated there. It's an addition, but we can pay 1 less if we're attaching it to a fairy, which is essentially we can use it for free, which is really nice. And the added resonator gets 200 to 100. So if we had Heavenly Guardian of Armalla out and we attach this, then that one fairy is at least getting 400, which is really nice. And we can banish this card and we prevent the next damage that we dealt to the target resonator until the end of the turn. So we have ways of like fishing it out of like our deck, fishing it out of our graveyard, and you know, all sorts of things to make sure that we can even like get as much use out of that card as possible, despite the fact it doesn't have remnant, sadly, which is kind of sad, but you know, then it would be a wee bit too overpowered. And I think the last spell that we... No, actually, we have another one. We have a spell chant instant here, which is the final word, which at first I didn't think this was a really good card until I actually started using it a lot when we were drafting Twilight Wanderer. It was such a good card. So, target blocking resonator you control gains 1000 until the end of the turn, and it's only 1 cost light, which is kind of insane for such a buff, but obviously you need to be blocking first in order to do that. But I feel like it was such a good card that I had to run it at least at 3, just, you know, to get that little added boost into the deck. Oops, I dropped that there. It's also insanely good for, like, drafting or whatever. If, like, you've ever drafted Twilight Wanderer, I quite like it. And the last spell that we have is a bit of an older card. I think, actually, it's from NPR. We have Accede the Light, which, I quite like this card. I didn't realise, like, how much I liked it until I properly read it over. It's a 2 cost, and when a target resonator we control is put into the graveyard this turn, we can search our main deck for a resonator with the same total cost as it, and then put it into our field, and then shuffle our deck. So essentially, since most of our stuff costs the same, which is, we have a lot of 1-drops, we have quite a few 2-drops, and, like, we only have, like, maybe 1 3-drop, and we've got, like, 2 different... we've got 2 5-drops and 2 4-drops. So we can easily, like, replace depending on what we lose. Most likely it'll be the 1-drops because we have most of those. And we can even, like, choose which one that we get to replace it with, which is really nice. So that's why I'm only really running this one at 3. And finally, it wouldn't be an Arla deck if we didn't include the bows, which, you know, with Arla is kind of even more essential because obviously the bows get 4 counters as opposed to 2 because we have Arla, which is really, really nice. And, you know, I really do like the bows. I feel like they've kind of gone down in value a little bit, like considering that we have Primogenitor now. But they always seem to work well with Arla. I don't care, like, what happens. They always go hand in hand. I feel like if you're going to run a ruler, you should totally do your best to run it with its intended regalia. And going to look at our magic stones, you'll probably see a little running theme here. I don't actually own any copies of Fairies Memoria, which is totally insane. I thought I did. Like, I was looking back at, say, my booster box opening of Twilight Wanderer, and I swear I did pull Fairies Memoria, but I think I must have traded them or something like that, because I was like, oh, I'm never going to build Fairies. And then I went and built Fairies and realised I don't have Fairies Memoria. So I've done my best to try and, like, replicate as best as I can, like, a big enough pool of, like, wills so that we can get enough colours from each of our for each of our fairies without having to run rewriting laws, because I'd rather not run it if I can help it. So we have 3 rulers Memoria. It's pretty much you know, we can run this and ensure that we get at least every single colour of will from these 3 stones. I would run it at 4, but I don't have that many copies of this either, and I'd rather not, like, switch them between different decks and such every single time I play. So we're only running it at 3. I noticed that most of the cards we run here are actually light, so as long as we get access to light, we don't really have too much of a problem. But in other case, I am running, like, some other jewel stones with it. I'm running 4 of Magic Stone of Gusting Skies, so we can get access to light and green. Green will probably only be used for the Wind Sprite or whatever, and that will give us more access to light, which is really helpful. I'm running 2 of the Magic Stone of Light Vapors, which will give us access to light and water for Water Sprite. And the last one I think that we're running is a Magic Stone of Heaven's Rift, which will give us access to light and dark. So I'm not running the Magic Stone of Heat Ray, mainly because I don't have more copies of it. I'm currently running it in my Grimia deck right now, which is why I'm not running it. But I think we should be fine anyway to get at least the will from it from Ruler's Memoria. So all in all, guys, that's my list for Arla's, like, I'd call it flying friends or whatever, because it's mainly fairies, but we've got a couple of angels in there. Obviously, I would prefer to try and get Fairies Memoria to try and like sort out the problem of having to like get all the colors and stuff for the different fairies. Let me know, guys, what you think of this deck. Whether you think Arla is probably the better ruler for fairies, or whether you have a different ruler in mind. Like, I know like some people would prefer to use Reflect or someone else entirely, but I feel like Arla is pretty good for this one. But let me know what you guys think, and what kind of fairy builds would you prefer to make? Would you like swarm it entirely with fairies, or would you like focus more on supporting them with spells and such? Let me know what you think of the deck, guys, and I'll see you all later.